Hey everybody, welcome to our first session. We are so blessed to have Carol Den Hende here with us today. She's going to be sharing Author Brand, Finding Power in Your Purpose. Carol is an award-winning author who pens stories of resilience and hope. She's also a speaker and MBA with 20 plus years experience in marketing and strategy. She's proud to be a climate realty leader and serve on nonprofit boards. One secret to her good fortune, her humorous husband, fun-loving twins, and rescue cat who prove that love really does conquer all. Carol, we're so blessed to have you.
Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. It is so great to see you, Jen, and thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. Thank you for bringing authors together to talk about, the work that means so much to our hearts. And thank you also, hopefully, NJRW is online. I just want to send a huge shout out to thank her for connecting us. And I'm thrilled to spend this time with everyone today. Jen, did you want to say something? Yeah.
I'm hiding out. I'm down below. I'm always here. I'm in the chat. I just want to say thank you so much, Carol. All right.
Awesome. Well, I'm thrilled to join everyone today to talk about author brand and finding power in your purpose. I'm going to start today by asking you a question. It's a simple question, which is, what got you out of bed this morning? Because that might give a clue to your purpose. And I'll tell you what I thought about when I woke up this morning. I actually ran through, what do I need to do today? And I realized that today was the day of the conference in which I get to spend time with you, with fellow writers, and I felt incredibly grateful. And that actually is a clue into my purpose, which I'm going to share with you because I'd love to share with you my journey of how I've defined my own brand and how I've brought that to life. But first, before we do that, let me just introduce myself for a moment and add on a little bit to how Jen's introduction, and then share with you what we're going to do today so you can have a sense how we're going to spend our 45 minutes together. So as Jen said, I'm Carol Den Hende. I actually am an entrepreneurial, inspirational leader who really believes in bringing out the optimism and opportunity in all of our futures by capitalizing on different creative hats that I wear. As author, I'm also a strategist. I'm also a digital leader. And I really aim to help people deepen their empathy for people and planet. And I'm thrilled to be able to share with you how I've used the concept of brand in order to do those things. And so we're going to cover three things today. We're going to talk about what is brand. There's a little bit of a common misconception there. We're going to talk about how to craft yours and give you some tools that professional marketers and brand people use. And then I'm going to give you the #1 tip for visual identity when you translate your brand into visual identity. So let me start with a teeny quiz. This is not one of those pop quizzes like you get in school. And if Jen, so hopefully this changed to page 2. If my presentation did not page forward to a new page, pop in and let me know because I want to make sure everyone can see what's on my screen. And I'll actually describe what's on my screen as well for everybody to be really clear. So I'm starting with this little quiz, which is simply for you to reflect for yourselves. Feel free to put in the chat box if you want as well your answer to this question. How clear do you feel about your author brand? And it can range anywhere. And this is a no judgment zone. There's no wrong answer. It's just to get a baseline assessment. And so I have a sense where you are as well. And it can range anywhere from 1, not clear at all, where you don't know what author brand means. And that's actually totally fine. And I hear that a lot. I've been speaking at writers' conferences for 7 or 8 years now. And I know that that's a common area of, stress, in fact, when people realize that they need to have an author brand. Or 2, maybe you should have a brand, but you don't know your own. 3, perhaps you're somewhat clear. You know what your brand means, but you've never tried to articulate your own. 4, perhaps you're clear on what an author brand is, and you have a sense of your own. Or 5, you're very clear. You can cite your brand or purpose from memory, which is where I am, but it has actually taken me time. And it's funny for me to say, given that I spent, of my decades of my career, my longest stretch of my career was in brands. I ran brands for Mars for 15 years. Everything. And so Mars is famous for chocolate. And if we were meeting in person, I would be bringing you chocolate gifts. So I'm sorry, a little bit sorry that we're meeting virtually, although it's probably opened up the audience to a wider group of people. But I've run brands, everything from combos to Twix, where I launched Twix peanut butter, to M&Ms and Three Musketeers and Milky Way and Dove chocolate in the US and in China. And that's really what I bring to this talk, in which we're going to define brand, in which we're going to decide how to craft yours, in which we're going to talk about the #1 tip for visual identity. And so actually defining brand is exactly where I'd like to start. And so if anyone knows where the origin of the term branding came from, feel free to guess or put it in the chat. I'll just share briefly, and you might already guess from seeing this photo of a cow with the word branding imprinted into its side, is this comes from actually a time where, an agricultural time in which when people were raising cattle, they found that not all cattle were equal. And some were higher quality, some were cared for better than others. And so ranchers who were really proud of their cattle wanted to have a way to represent that level of quality. And so they would brand as a mark of ownership, but also it eventually became a mark of quality into the hide of the cattle to show, which cattle were theirs. And it's really that concept. Now, when we come to defining your purpose and your brand, you don't have to get all the way to tattooing it into your side. Although if you do feel that inspired, please reach out and let me know. Now, let me put brand a little bit into context, because I actually speak on all of these topics that you see on screen, and it's really all about how we think about marketing as authors. I often find in these 7 or 8 years in which I've been speaking at writers' conferences like Writers Digest and Rutgers Writers Conference, and I've spoken at New Jersey's SCBWI, because I know here we have a kid-lit audience and really enjoyed that. I actually speak about this idea of marketing really being simply the art and science of finding and connecting with your audience. And there's 3 pillars I find very helpful to think about and that I speak on. So the one we're covering today is incredibly foundational. It's this idea of brand, and I'm going to define brand on just the very next page. Your brand as differentiated from the concept of visual identity. And this is something that gets conflated at conferences when I hear other people speaking about marketing. So I'll define that as well. And then third, we're not going to cover this today, but marketing platform, which is both the marketing strategies and tactics, are incredibly important to us as authors. And I do find, having now spoken and presented to, probably thousands of authors, that we come to the written word because we love literature and we want to tell the stories that are in our hearts. And then we're faced with the rude reality that we also have to be business people. We also have to be marketers. And we don't necessarily have the tools to do that. And so that's really what's called me to speaking at writers' conferences, is to share my background, my experiences as a marketer, and now I'm a strategy and insights person, professional. And so I love sharing all of that with authors, because I know that it's so hard to feel like what you want to do is right, but then you also have these other things to do that fall under the bucket of marketing. So just to give a bit of context. And here, let's get right into the definition. In case this question is lingering in your mind, maybe you are one or two where you think, I'm not even quite sure what author brand means. Tell me what this is and tell me why it's important to me. So brand is really a concept that encapsulates the unique positioning, differentiation, relevance, and meaning of a person, product, or service. I pause here because sometimes people hear brand and they're thinking about their Campbell soup or their Lexus in the driveway or the things they buy at the grocery store. They think it's a thing and wonder, how can I apply the concept of brand to myself as a person? So I really like to simplify concepts, and I would simplify this concept of brand down to promise. It is simply the promise that you are making to the reader when they enter into your world. And so I think if we think about brand as a concept around promise, we can differentiate it from visual identity. And this is where, when I hear sometimes people who aren't marketers speaking about marketing at writers' conferences, they conflate these ideas. They say brand is your website or the colors you use. That's actually a separate step. The first step is really understanding and articulating your promise before you think about how you translate that into visual identity. And here on the page, it simply defines visual identity as your brand promise translated into the physical and digital assets, which can include your logo, your typeface or font, your website design, your business cards, your book covers, the look and feel of your brand that represents that promise that you're making to readers. So I hope the clarity of those two is helpful to you so that we can think about each thing at a time. Now, I promised you that I'd answer the question of why. Why does any of this matter? Why are brand and visual identity important? On the screen, I have simply the number 9. And I'm curious whether you have any guesses what that number 9 might be. Feel free to type in the chat box. Even though I can't see it, I will go and check it out later. And Jen will be keeping track and letting me know if we need to pause on anything. This number 9 I put on there as a provocation because actually human attention spans have dropped tremendously. And this is part of why brand and visual identity are important. Because if you believe in your work, you want your work to do exactly how I define marketing, which is to find and reach your readers so that your work can do the work, your work can do what it's meant to do, then you need to be able to break through what are increasingly lower attention spans. Sally Hogshead, in her book, How the World Sees You, says that in agrarian times, attention spans were 20 minutes long. You see, so there's a number 9 on the page here. What do you think attention spans have dropped to? Unfortunately, it's not 9 minutes. For millennials, they say attention spans have dropped to 9 seconds. And so when you think about wanting to have a reader pay attention to the promise of your book, the back cover blurb, your endorsement quotes, any aspect that you want them to learn about your work as an author, about your books, you only have 9 seconds to break through. And this is why clarity of your promise and then how you translate that into your visual identity is so important. Now, I do want to clear up one thing because sometimes people, come to me and they say they feel uncomfortable with the idea of thinking about their author brand. They think that marketing is artifice, that it's about finding ways to pretend to be something you're not. So that's why this picture is of a kitten looking in the mirror and seeing a lion. And my point here is simply that really good marketing, really clear articulation of your brand promise needs to be authentic. Absolutely authentic to you, to what your higher order purpose is. And let me show you how this can come to life and what I mean by this. I'm going to share with you the actual template that we use to think about brands as professional marketers that I have used as a professional marketer running many brands in multiple countries over my decades of my career, and that I've actually simplified down into 5 key areas that are relevant for us as authors, as we think about our own personal brand, that we can articulate our brand promise through our brand values, through a concept called Archetype, which we're going to get into in a moment, through our inspiring purpose. This is very powerful, and this is actually the first place I started for myself, and I recommend people start. So we're going to get into that. And also your personality, which is so unique to you, and your unique assets and visuals. And this is where there is a link in the template to the visual identity piece. So let's dive into archetype. We're actually going to spend the most time on archetype and inspiring purpose, because I think the other pieces are more self-explanatory. I think when I ask you, what are your key values, themes, what do you stand for? Each of us can probably already, articulate that and get a sense of that. But archetype and inspiring purpose are probably newer concepts. Same with personality and unique assets and visuals. I bet you already have a sense, if you have work in the world, if you've already published, you already have a sense of these things that make you unique. So let's go into the two areas that might be new for you. This idea of archetype comes from, actually, Carl Jung is quite famous for describing 12 key archetypes, which he says are universal stories that have been told throughout time. Some authors are aware of archetypes, but they use it in a different way, and it's absolutely fine. You can use archetypes to think about your characters in your books, in your fiction. Is your character one of these archetypes? My ask here, as we talk about author brand, is to think about archetype and how it might apply to you as author. I'm going to give examples in a moment, but let's go through these 12 archetypes. I'll just go ahead and name them so you know what they are. So the archetypes are warrior, creator, explorer, rebel, sage, lover, everyman, caregiver, jester, ruler, innocent, and magician. So let me give you some examples. And I think each of those words is going to evoke some type of imagery in your mind, some type of idea what that means. There's actually a lot of great resources. If this area sounds intriguing to you, there are books like The Hero and the Outlaw that talk about the concepts behind archetype, where they come from. There are quizzes online. And actually, there's one on my screen here, which I would recommend if you want to do a quiz for yourself to try to identify your own archetype. It's simply capt.org/pmai-assessment/archetype-assessment-personality.htm. I know that's a little long. I don't expect that you would have jotted that down in that time, but just wanted you to know that the URL is there if you want to check that out. But let me give you some examples to bring this concept to life a little bit more. So for instance, the warrior archetype could be like Homer when he wrote the Odyssey. The creator archetype could be Oscar Wilde, who was incredibly inventive for his time. The explorer archetype could be Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote about adventures, even outside of worlds that where we live. The rebel archetype could be Dave Pilkey, and hopefully here in this YA audience or in this kidlit audience, you're familiar with his work, which is, rebellious with a hint of humor as well. And I bring that part up because I also want to say that none of this is about stereotyping or saying that everyone can fit into 12 buckets. In fact, each of us is so unique, and I absolutely believe that. So one way to use archetype as well is not just the one, but maybe the combination and how much weighting you give to each archetype that is really meaningful for you. You'll see the ones that I've put into my brand compass in a little bit, but let me go through the rest of these examples. So a sage or a wise man could be Roland Smith, who my teens loved when they were younger and in middle school for his IQ series. The lover archetype could be Anais Nin. Now she's famous for writing quite sensual work. Lover is interesting because it doesn't have to be that type of lover. It also could be a lover of mankind. It could be, different kinds of lovers. It doesn't have to be sensual. The everyman is a good example of that would be Beverly Cleary, very famous author. Caregiver could be the work of Benjamin Spock. A jester archetype could be an author like Mo Willems, who really has that humor come through. A ruler archetype could be an author like Tolstoy, the innocent, Judy Blume, magician, very famously, J.K. Rowling. I'm not going to get into any of her controversy here, but she's a great example just because she's so well known as an author. And so let that marinate a little bit, especially if these concepts are new. Think about archetype. Think about, sometimes you think with your head, like what makes sense for me, but also think with your heart or your gut. What are you drawn to instinctively? What do you think represents you? And especially your most true, your authentic self. One other piece I'll give before we get into some examples, in terms of asking yourself this question of, why would it matter to articulate that author brand, is I point to the work of Simon Sinek. And if you've seen his TED Talks or you've seen his presentations on YouTube, you'll know he's quite famous for this bullseye that's on the screen, which has why in the center, and then a circle outside of that with how, and then the most exterior circle is what. The why, how, what model, he's very famous for speaking about it in business terms. He says companies that are really successful, how are they differentiated from companies that are just middling of the road, even if they're in the same category? And he uses an electronics example, I actually can't remember the competitor he uses versus Apple, but the difference is, competitors, especially at the time, and this is an older talk that he gave, when they were coming out with MP3 players, if you even remember that terminology, MP3 players, playing music electronically and having it digitally, when that first was breaking into the market, those companies, the competitors, felt they were simply, creating a technical device that could carry an MP3 file on it. Whereas Apple started with, it's not about the category or the technology. It's about the why they do what they do, to create these beautiful immersive experiences. And then the how is through the love of design. And then the what really becomes creating an MP3 player, which we now know as our iPhones, which do everything for us. And so I think this concept is very powerful for us as we think about our author brands, because that idea of actually inspiring purpose, if we move from archetype now over to inspiring purpose, that inspiring purpose I often think of as my why I do what I do. In fact, the inspiring purpose question is simply, why do you do what you do beyond the obvious profit and functional purposes? And then the how is how we bring that to life. Sometimes we call that voice, like what's our style in our writing? And the what is the work we produce. It all starts with the why, the most powerful part. All right, let's get into some of these examples that I promised you. Here I'm giving you an illustrative brand promise using that framework that we just discussed with values, archetype, inspiring purpose, personality, unique assets, and visuals. I'm not sharing the name of this author, and I'm curious whether you think of any particular authors as you hear this description. So if the brand values for this author is that underdogs can win, if the archetypes are magician and rebel, if the inspiring purpose is to give everyday heroes hope, if the personality and tonality is adventurous, scrappy, smart, fallible, geeky, and the unique assets and visuals are absorbing other worlds, fairy tales, New York Times bestselling. I wish that was in my unique assets and visuals, that part. Does any author come to your mind as you hear that? And we're going to see her work in a moment. She is a YA author, so hopefully those little hints start your mind going. So think about that. Feel free to put any guesses into the chat. I'm going to show you mine as well. And you know what's interesting? One thing I want to share very transparently is that brand promises can morph a bit over time, and that's absolutely fine. I have found that for myself. I have actually done this exercise multiple times. I've run longer workshops where I walk authors through how to complete these. And we can, I've done 3-hour workshops where we just really hands-on workshop these. And so I've done this for myself multiple times, and I've tweaked it over time. And in fact, I'm even thinking more deeply now about my inspiring purpose, about my brand. Here's my most recent articulation I'll share with you. So my brand values, I state that I believe that the clarity of an individual's purpose or their brand unearths their good and awareness of our connectedness, which elevates us collectively. So I believe, I'm talking about this idea of community, of believing in the good in people. And the archetypes, and this is really consistent, lover of humanity. And this is when I said lover doesn't have to be sensual lover. So for me, it's lover of humanity and creator. I really do resonate with this idea of really deep creativity. And then my inspiring purpose, and I've shared this on podcasts, so if you've heard me interview talking about Goodbye Orchid, I often say my number one piece of advice for authors is to know their inspiring purpose and allow that to guide them as a compass, as a true north. So you know what to say yes to and maybe what to say no to. And I've articulated mine as by being my authentic self, I aim to inspire hope and empathy for people and planet. And my personality and tonality is elegant, approachable, encouraging, articulate, professional, contemporary. And maybe I'll pause there and just say also that, going back to this idea of authenticity, I, have been given feedback from others that this is the way they see me too. And so I do feel like I'm on the right track with these things, they feel true inside of me. And then when I express myself externally, people give me feedback that this is how they see me as well. And that's incredibly helpful for this, real consistency in your authenticity. And then there's some unique assets and visuals down here, clean white, gradients of magenta to purple, edged black. That was actually from when I did my website design. And so you'll see some of that play out in the website. And I'm going to show you how I've visually created a world around my novel, Goodbye Orchid, too, at the very end. All right, so I hope it's helpful to see some examples. I do want to share where to use these things because people are thinking, now I've got this brand promise and this concept, I have this visual identity. There's different places these can play out. So your brand promise can show through in your storyline, in your style, which we might call voice, even in the way you write your about the author. I've seen this done beautifully, people who write humor, and they write their about the author in a humorous voice, which is really consistent. This idea of consistency is going to come through again when we talk about visual identity. Social media content also is absolutely another place where your brand promise can come through. And then in the industry, as you pitch agents and editors, as you query them, as you write your synopsis, it can come through in there too. Whereas your visual identity, your physical and digital assets, the consistency of the visual world you're creating is going to come through in your website, in your social media visuals, in your online ads, in your book cover, in your author name, font, tagline, your business card, your clothing, your giveaways. If you can see, I'm going to hold up something right now. This is my business card that I used when I went to Writer's Digest to pitch agents and editors. It has that magenta hue that I talk about in my visual identity on my brand compass. My business card is in a plastic case, and inside the case are M&Ms. These M&Ms are not just ordinary ones, but they're pink and white ones, which you can get if you go to M&Ms.com or if you go to any of the M&M stores, like there's one in Times Square. The reason I bring this up is because here's a way that I was able to take my brand promise and translate it into my physical world so that I could land my meaning and be memorable in a really critical moment. So this was at Writer's Digest Conference. I was pitching at Pitch Slam. And if anyone's been to that conference, you might know. At Pitch Slam, you only get 90 seconds with each agent and editor to share your pitch. And then you get 90 seconds of feedback. And then they ring a bell and you have to move on. So you get 3 minutes max with this person. I was pitching agents and editors for Goodbye Orchid. And this is actually how I met my agent. So when I went to pitch, I knew that one thing that was unique about me and about my brand when it came to an agent and editor looking at me and seeing if they might be interested is my marketing background. I wanted that to come through, but I didn't want to take time away from talking about Goodbye Orchid. And so what I did was I put my business card in these M&M's business case holders. And so when I introduced myself, I could simply say, I'm Carol Den Hende. I'm a marketer and strategist for Mars, and hand them this business card that was different than everyone else's, that was memorable. And therefore, when they asked me for a partial or full manuscript, when I emailed it to them, the first line of my email said, I hope that the pink M&Ms sweetened your day. Every agent and editor who met me that day remembered me, and this is how I signed with my agent. And in fact, I took it a little farther. I don't know how much you're able to see what I'm wearing, but I have a hot pink shirt on with a pink flower. I have a pink bracelet. And that day, I had this exact pink bracelet. I had a pink outfit, and I had a pink bag. And so I had actually branded myself physically, in addition to these little cues to just help be remembered, because with only 9 seconds of attention span, that's a way to break through. I realized I probably thought we were going to be interactive in this conference, and I apologize that I didn't ask. So I'm going to skip this exercise because that is a very interactive exercise, and I hope one day all of us will meet in some physical conference and I'll be able to do it with you because it's super fun. But I want to introduce this next idea of visual identity. I promised you I'd share the #1 tenet when it comes to translating that brand promise, using that template to think about your brand into visual identity. I'm going to use an example from outside of books. I'm going to use a category we've probably all consumed, which is orange juice. Here's a visual of Tropicana and their famous, iconic, fresh orange with a red and white straw in it. Now, you may know this story because it's quite famous, but there was a designer, a design firm, who had come to Tropicana and said, great, you're showing that orange, you're showing the straw, but this is clearly not how people drink orange juice. Where is the glass? Where's the actual usage occasion? They convinced Tropicana to change their packaging to this one, which shows a white package with a glass of orange juice on it. And when the marketer said, wait a minute, what about the iconic fresh orange? They said, oh, don't worry, we're going to put that on the cap. The cap is going to look like a little miniature fresh orange made out of plastic, and you're going to be fine. What do you think happened when this was back actually in 2009, 2010 when this happened? They changed the packaging. Sales within weeks dropped more than 20% because people, when they went on shelf, could not find the iconic imagery that they were used to. The new orange juice packaging looked generic. And so very quickly, the brand team realized they had made a mistake and had gone awry, and they went back to the original imagery of the fresh orange with the red and white straw in it, and the Tropicana brand, represented horizontally the way that people are used to. Now, what's the point of me sharing this story about orange juice, just, besides the point that it's early morning and perhaps you are enjoying your juice as we're hanging out together here? My point is the #1 tenet when it comes to visual identity is consistency. Because attention spans have dropped to 9 seconds, because we're actually bombarded with 5,000 marketing messages a day. To break through, we need to have that visual consistency so people start to connect the brand promise that you stand for with those visuals. If a brand like Tropicana or any of the packaged goods brands out there that spend literally tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising, marketing, and promotions a year feel that it's so important to stay with consistency, and when they don't, they see the negative impact. Can you imagine us as individual authors who don't? I know I don't have tens of millions or hundreds of millions in marketing a year. I need to even hold on to that consistency harder. And I do an entire class on design, on visual identity. We're not going to get into all that detail, but I did want to share that one tip because it's so powerful. And now let me demonstrate what that might look like to an author. And this is where the reveal is going to come. If you remember the first brand compass I showed, or the first brand framework I showed, and I asked you to think, who might that YA author be who believes in, fairy tale worlds, as a New York Times bestselling author? Here's the person I was thinking of. If you thought of Marissa Meyer, give yourselves a big pat on the back. If you didn't, that's okay too, because there are probably multiple authors who could fit aspects of that. And so the uniqueness needs to come through in the combination of that brand promise with a visual world that she's creating. When she came out with her series, it started with Cinder, then Scarlet, then Crest, then Winter, then Stars Above, this series that's inspired by fairy tales. I really loved the visual world she created. There was such consistency of font of her book cover, in her book cover title. And this was, the image in the back was her website at the time. I actually haven't been there recently, so I don't know if it still looks the same. But it really created this sense of an immersive world that was otherworldly, which I thought was really quite consistent with the content that she has in her books. And then let me show you one other visual example, and then I'll close out with how you can keep in touch with me. I do want to leave a few minutes for questions because I'd love to have a little interaction with you. So the other example of consistency is how I've brought it to life. My debut novel, Goodbye Orchid, came out in October of 2020, Kohler Books published in October. And so it creates a visual world. I'd like to share a few things about this. If you've seen the cover shows orchids, but they're shattered. This idea came from the brief that I gave the designers at Kohler Books. I said I wanted to represent the most critical tension in Goodbye Orchid, which is about characters Phoenix Walker and Orchid Page. And I'll just maybe briefly tell you so you understand why we went with the shattered orchid image. What happens is the two of them are falling in love. And then Phoenix Walker suffers an accident while she's away on a business trip. She's actually overseas and they're not in touch with each other. They both think they're going to see each other in 6 weeks when she's back. But in that intervening time, an accident befalls him that changes him forever. And as a result of that change, he feels, it changes his own self-image of himself, changes how he thinks about his relationship with others, including his love for Orchid Page. And he remembers, even though he's longing for her in the hospital when he wakes, he remembers that she has been traumatized as a child, and she's quite sensitive to images of trauma. And he knows this because they had been working on pro bono military campaigns. This story is actually inspired by combat wounded veterans. And so he wakes feeling he's faced with the hardest decision of his life. Although he's longing for her, he wonders if to love her, he might need to leave her. And so you can hear in that little description that it's a poignant story. It's very deeply emotional. It is truly inspired by combat wounded veterans and is raising money for USA Cares, which helps military veterans and their families. And so what I said to the designer was, I wanted to capture the emotional and physical shattering of Phoenix and Orchid in the cover design. And they were able to do it with this image of shattered orchids. And then there's also animated versions of this. So you can see it as a GIF, the shattering happening as an animation. Oh yeah, here I actually put the animation in here. So you can see a little bit of that. That same imagery, these colors of magenta and purple and the script of Goodbye Orchid written as if it's handwritten, the image of the shattered orchids can be used quite consistently. So here's an example of Bookmarks and my book club kit, which uses that same imagery. And you can see here some of these gold emblems, the round gold emblems. I'm starting to show a bit too of the awards because Goodbye Orchid has won now 12 awards. It's a little, hard for me to believe. I still am pinching myself. And so that becomes then part of my visual assets and something that I communicate because it conveys credibility. Here's another example, just so you can see some consistency. This is the GoodReads giveaway. And so the background uses that same kind of modeled purple background that's on the book cover, the same shattered orchids, the same handwritten Goodbye Orchid font. The image of the book is there again. Because people start to learn images as a whole. They don't necessarily dissect each piece. We're so busy with these 5,000 marketing messages and all the things we have going on in our lives. We don't always have the conscious mind space to be able to break down each of the components. And so therefore it is really important to show your book cover consistently. And then I'll just show one other visual so you can see how I can keep it consistent, but also introduce this idea of the awards. And so here the book title and the handwritten font is there, the book cover image is there, and then 12 of these little emblems that represent each of the 12 organizations that have recognized Goodbye Orchid with different awards. And just as a quick aside, I'm certainly super proud of all of them. There are a few that are really meaningful to me. The book cover design, both the exterior and the interior have won awards. The interior design has an amazing feature. I won't even go into that right now, but I think the one I'm most proud of is this book has been awarded multiple times for disability awareness. And I think that's what touches my heart the most, because the book is inspired by combat wounded veterans, and I hope to do good in the world through that work. So that's incredibly meaningful for me. 2 weeks ago, I was named Disability Hero of the Year by Springboard Consulting, and I think it probably brought me to tears, to be honest, and might do so right in this moment. Okay, so let me summarize, this little journey we've been on as we've been talking about how author brand can help you find your power through your purpose. So my main points are: first, think about your brand conceptually, because it is your unique promise. Secondly, as you're defining your brand framework, use the tools that are useful to you. So if you liked the Carl Jung archetypes, feel free to use it, but don't also feel like you need to be a slave to that. None of this is set in stone. Use the inspiring purpose. If you find that helpful as a true north to say what's consistent about your brand, simply ask yourself that question. What's the reason you do beyond the obvious profit and functional purposes? And then the third point is simply visual identity is the physical manifestation of your brand. And the number one tenet is just be consistent. So I'd love for you to reflect, on the same question I asked you right at the top of our time together. How clear do you feel about author brand? And has it changed from where you were? Are you a 1? You're not clear. You don't know what author brand means. 2, not very clear. You should have a brand, but you don't know your own. 3, somewhat clear. You know what brand means, but haven't tried to articulate your own. 4, perhaps you're clear. You know what author brand means and have a sense of your own, because some of this is intuitive. Or 5, are you very clear and you can cite your brand or purpose from memory the way I can when I'm being interviewed in a podcast and can say that I aim to inspire hope and empathy in people and planet. Lastly, I would love to keep in touch. It's very easy to find me. Probably the easiest thing is my Linktree, linktr.ee/CBDH has links to my social media, like my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Feel free to connect with me there. I am speaking at more writers' conferences, so my website, carolvandenhende.com/speaking, has different places where I'm speaking about all different concepts, and you'll see the dates that are coming up. I have one coming up with a romance writers chapter on September 11th, which is definitely a bittersweet day. I have another one coming up November 6th. It's the Liberty States Fiction Writers Conference. This was pushed back from what was supposed to be an in-person conference. So there are definitely ways to keep in touch. There's an email list that Jen had mentioned up front. So feel free to sign up for that at carolvandenhende.com/contact. I'd absolutely love to hear from you all. And I really thank you for this time and for your attention. It's been an absolute delight.
Wow, Carol, we actually are just so blown away from not only your expertise, but your care and everything that you've provided for us today. We have Sherry Mercer who said, I can't wait to watch this again, because this is something that we need to actually go back and reflect on. We've had comments that people might range from a 2 to a 4 in their quizzes, but it's also, too, rediscovering our brand. So, one of the questions was, how do you find the visuals to reflect your brand?
Yeah, I have so much respect for designers, and the class I teach about visual identity is all about how to be a great collaborative partner with your designers. You can ask the designer that I worked with at Kohler Books. I think she has an incredible amount of respect and really loved working with me, because I started from a place of understanding what was the most important, single most important thing to communicate. Who is the target? What's the insight about that? And so it's about really being clear around your brand promise first and your strategy to be able to get to these types of breakthrough visuals.
Okay, we've got Jaden here today. He is a youth author and he is publishing his first book this week. Go, Jaden. And Jaden's question is, do you think that Instagram and Facebook ads are useful for books?
Yeah, so I give other talks about marketing, which is about marketing platform, and sometimes I touch on the tactics, like, where to spend advertising dollars. I'd say in general, of course, there's no sweeping answer for any given author because each author is in a different place in their journey. Where are they in their career? And I'd say the overarching concept that I found helpful is the idea of trial and error. You have to find what works for you, how you reach your readers, and it comes from the insight of who are your readers and what's the benefit you're giving them. That's ultimately this idea of promise or author brand, is what's the benefit you're giving your audience. And when you're clear about that, then you can start thinking about where do you want to give that benefit. And that might be Instagram ads, it might be Facebook ads. Those certainly have worked for people. So there's no reason they shouldn't, but it's not about just blindly choosing, one of those platforms. It's actually about thinking, who are you trying to reach and how can you best reach them? And it also comes down to creative quality. It's not just about where you advertise, but what's the content you're sharing? And is that able to communicate the value that you're able to give people?
I also want to say that I cannot wait to go back and pull up the chart, create myself a template, and ask myself those the values, the archetypes, and all of that with each one of my books, but also who am I as an author? So you have given us wonderful tools and tips today, Carol. I want to thank you so much for encouraging us and inspiring us to go and evaluate our promise, to be able to articulate that, and then how to translate that out when we're sharing. It's just amazing, Carol. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, guys, join us for our next session. You're going to go back to the YouTube playlist. We have our next lineup at 10 o'clock. We are going to have an author illustrator team that are going to be sharing their words with us. So please check out Michelle DeRosier, and we hope to see you there. All right, thanks again, Carol.
Bye.